Jack, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start by talking about the price of food and whether or not supplies are going to last. I remember learning as a child that eventually the world might run out of food, but is that becoming a reality today?
I don't think so. I think this is a host of circumstances all coming together at once, which has really created this incredible peak in prices, which I think will temper off and level off a bit. 5 years ago, the prices for grains and oilseeds were very, very low. In most countries, it was below the farmer's cost of production. Hence, we saw the rise in subsidies in the United States and other countries. But what's happened really over the last few years is we've had incredible droughts in Australia. They're a major wheat exporter. Europe has had some very significant bad weather, so did the United States. And so we've seen a drop in world stocks. We've also got the introduction of ethanol and biodiesel, which is competing crops, which has also created a bit more demand. And I think also the fact that prices were so low in many developing countries like Africa, there really hasn't been significant investment in agriculture production. I think we still have the capacity to grow the food if we get a little bit better organized.
So we can feed the world, we just have to get better at it. Could something like GM provide an answer? It's a very emotive issue, but could it be what we need?
People will see positive products coming out of GM breeding systems. And as we see more years of experience in other countries, I think the confidence will come that it's not creating a health dilemma. But I must caution, it's critical that people have a very strong regulatory system and bring in the open discussion, because it may not be for every country at this time period, but I think it can work in some circumstances.
Now let's talk about water. There is a lot of discussion on the subject at the moment. Is it going to become the issue of the future?
We've seen the issue of climate change move from one point to the agenda to be the focus of just about every conversation, and I think that water should have that same priority. We have a situation in many countries, whether we're in the plains of China or off of California or many African countries, Mexico, where we are drawing the aquifer down at a rate that's very significant. We are, in fact, overusing right now on a daily basis the world's supply of water. And when we hit the wall on this topic area, it will be very difficult to roll the clock back. If you want to conserve water, then you have to bring a better system in where farmers who harvest water in runoff in the monsoon season or bring in new technologies that save water, we have to find reward mechanisms in that so they get to use more water when it's in the dry season. This is a place where the business community has to pay attention to its client group. On the other hand, we need infrastructure. That costs money. And the farmers will obviously have to pay their fair share of infrastructure, but we have to be careful that we get this right. We can't keep putting this off. We have a huge population in most countries where the farmers are really excluded from most of the conversation, most of the policy making, and most of the economic activity. Governments have got to stop doing this and really pull them into the thinking and the planning, or we're not going to see much change.
It seems to me that this is a little bit like the global warming issue, in that people were almost in denial way back when, and now it's a subject that everybody takes for granted and says, yes, we need to do something about this. Does this actually help? Because, more of the public at large are kind of ecologically aware now.
I really hope that the global awareness on climate change will really help us start bringing in these other questions that have been there. There has been some movement. I'm not pessimistic. I guess the part that I find so frustrating is we have the ability to solve these problems now. We know what works in many countries. We know how to culturally adapt them to make them work in other countries.
Do you think then, if investing in the agriculture industry is going to become more attractive, that perhaps the private sector could play a part in this?
Well, I think the private sector can play a very positive role. I mean, the private sector is not the villain here. It never has been. But because conditions were so poor in agriculture, there really wasn't much of an incentive to get into that investment in some countries. And so the whole conversation we've had today has really been about a different scenario, one that gives opportunity, one which will draw investment in, and in many countries the private sector is very good at this.
Well, let's talk about people now. Half the world lives in cities. We see a huge flow of people into the cities. Could we end up in a situation where the countryside, the farms, are actually understaffed?
Well, if the youth is like my 5 children, They go where they see opportunity and a future, and an economic future, as well as a cultural and a rewarding job. And so I think if all these issues we've talked about work their way into a much more positive economic situation for the rural community and rural entrepreneurs and farmers in general, the youth will stay.